Hey guys, Mobius Y here with another video from World of Tanks console on the Xbox version. In the background here, there's going to be a game, maybe two, in my IS-8 that I recorded several weeks before my IS-8 review, which I've had out for over a month by now. So these are some very old replays. I do hope you enjoyed them. I'm simply going to discuss and give you some very important advice if you are the least bit interested in the World of Tanks Community Tournament. Now, the World of Tanks Community Tournament so far has been the competitive aspect behind World of Tanks on the Xbox. And if you haven't been paying attention, the World of Tanks Community Tournament Season 3 has been announced and will be starting up in June. Now, WCT 3 is vastly expanding over WCT 2. In the previous tournament, we only had 32 teams playing against each other. In this tournament, we're doubling that to 64. There's going to be a lot more teams, there's going to be a lot more competition, and there's going to be a lot more new blood out there. So I really want to give you this advice. For those of you who are even the least bit interested in WCT, I want to give you this advice to help prepare you as best as you can to be the most successful you can possibly be in WCT. If you're even the least bit interested in WCT, I strongly recommend you pay attention on the forums to when they announce open registration for your teams. The competitive side of World of Tanks on the Xbox is a completely different animal from the random public matches that we all play to earn silver, upgrade our tanks, so on and so forth. It's a much more enjoyable aspect to World of Tanks, at least it is for me. I have much more fun in a training room scrimmaging against another clan, trying out different strategies, trying out different positions, trying out new maps even to run various strategies. I have much more enjoyment from that, just doing that for an hour or an hour and a half, than I do playing public random battles for half a day, to be totally honest. So I strongly urge that if you're even the least bit intrigued by the WCT, by the competitive aspect of World of Tanks console, that you take the time to properly prepare yourself beforehand and jump in feet first. The best way to experience it is to simply sign up, jump in a tournament, and get your feet wet, so to speak. Now, with that being said, I'm going to give you guys some crucial advice for those of you who are interested in jumping into the WCT 3 in particular. It's basically just going to be three critical steps to prepare you as best as you can for WCT 3. So the first one coming up here is, after you've assembled your team, once your roster has been decided, your team needs to get the right tanks. This is step one. And this is probably going to be the most time-consuming out of all of them, to be totally honest. But it's one of the most crucial, easily. If your team is properly set up where everybody has the appropriate tanks and they have decent crews on them, then you can essentially run any strategy on any map. And who knows, you could cause an upset against a more experienced team, a team that has been practicing for longer, a team that has previously participated in tournaments. Whatever, you have a much higher chance of upsetting against them. You'll be better prepared against other inexperienced teams who have not had that much time to practice or have not been in a tournament previously. Simply put, it will increase your odds of success. So the way WCT works is it runs the 754 format, as it is often abbreviated. What that means is each team fields 7 tanks in every battle, and the tank composition is used up by what are dubbed tier points. And each team is assigned 54 tier points to their tank composition. Tier points are just quickly an abbreviation saying, depending on the tier of the tank, that's how many tier points get used up for your team. So, for example, a tier 3 tank would use up 3 tier points out of the possible 54, and a tier 9 tank would use up 9 tier points out of the possible 54. However, in WCT, the allowed tiers are only 6 through 8, so essentially the 2 possible team setups that you can run in a battle are you can have 6 tier 8s and 1 tier 6, or 5 tier 8s and 2 tier 7s. Both of those setups will use up the full 54 tier points with those team compositions. Now, with that being said, it's important that your team has the right tanks for those team compositions. The tanks that I'm going to list are the most recommended that pretty much everybody on your team gets, if possible. It's not going to be 100% possible, especially for the first tank I name, because it's a premium tank. I'm going to say that right now. But if everybody on your team gets as many of these tanks as possible, you can run any possible strategy you want on any map you want, You can basically play your game in every match. These tanks are also used by the most successful teams in the WCT tournaments extensively. So I'm not simply pulling tanks out of my butt. I'm not just naming random tanks because, oh, this tank does really good in public matches or anything like that. It is simply a case of the most winningest teams in WCT run these tanks extensively, and there are reasons for it. If you would like me to go into greater detail as to why certain tanks are used and some tanks are largely not by the top teams in WCT, I can do that in a later video. Just let me know in the comments below and I will consider it. But for now, I'm simply going to name the top tanks that you want to have everybody on your team get as many of these as possible. Now, the number one tank is going to be the most difficult one to get. It's a tier 6, and it's the most used tier 6 by the most successful teams in WCT. And it's the AMX Chaffee. Now, this is a French premium tier 6 light tank. This will probably be one of the harder ones to acquire because obviously not everybody bought an AMX Chaffee when they were available. But if you can get 2 people on your roster, or even just 1 on your roster that has an AMX Chaffee, chances are they're going to be running the AMX Chaffee almost exclusively throughout the whole tournament. It's simply the most useful tier 6 tank that you can utilize in the WCT format. Obviously, this isn't always possible to have 1 or 2 people that will have one. If you do find yourself in this sticky situation where you don't have 1 or even 2 people with an AMX Chaffee, then you're going to have to look for alternatives. I'll get into that a little bit later. So that's the first tank that I would recommend you want to try and set up in your team's roster. It'll probably also be the hardest one to get because it's the only non-tech tree tank. Now, for tier 8 tanks, I'm going to start with the 4 top tier 8 tanks that you want people to get as many as possible out of these 4 tanks. Now, the first 2 tanks I'm going to list, you want everybody on your team to have one. If everybody on your team has both of these tanks, you can use them on any map for any strategy, and then that frees up other people to use alternative tanks. WCT rules only allow 1 team to run 3 types of the same kind of tank. Now, the first 2 tanks that you want everybody on your team to get is the IS-3 and the T-54 Lightweight. The IS-3 is the most used Tier 8 heavy tank, and the T-54 Lightweight is the most used Tier 8 light tank in replacement of medium tanks. And there are specific reasons for these. The IS-3 has really troll side-spaced armor. You can get crazy bounces with it, especially against T-54 lightweights, and it has the highest alpha damage of Tier 8 heavy tanks with its awesome BL9 gun. The 54 lightweight is extremely mobile, it's got really good DPM, and it's very, very crucial for those swarm tactics that are used very often by the more experienced teams. So those are the top 2 tanks you want everybody to get. The other 2 tanks that people want to get at Tier 8, these are also very crucial, but chances are not everybody will have these two tanks as well. And they are the US T-32 Tier 8 heavy tank and the Tier 8 heavy tank, French heavy tank, the AMX 50-100. The T-32 is kind of a polar opposite from the IS-3, but where the IS-3 can't be used because of its lack of gun depression, then you can use T-32s. Say on more open maps where you need heavy tanks poking ridge lines and still sporting really strong turret armor. That's where T-32s come in. If you have most of the people on your team buy back or grind for a T-32, then you'll be more than ready. Now, the 4th tank that I named, the AMX 50-100, it is the premier burst damage autoloader used in 754 format. It has the most HP at 1400, so it can take some hits, but it still has really high clip damage potential, which is with its absolutely devastating 100mm autoloader gun. So not only can it take a couple hits while it is dumping its clip, it can dish out a lot of damage. And it's also very mobile, so it can adapt to the quickly changing circumstances on the battlefield if it needs to. Those are the top 4 Tier 8 tanks. As I said, you want everybody on your team to have an IS-3 and a T-54 lightweight. I would highly recommend you get at least 6 to 8 people that also get a T-32. And if you have, 2, 3, maybe even 4 people that have an AMX 50-100, then you're golden. So let's just recap here. If you have even 1 or 2 people in your 10-person roster with an AMX Chaffee, they will probably run those exclusively, and you will wind up running 6 tier 8s and 1 tier 6 in just about every match, because you are going to have that person in an AMX Chaffee. From there, you can extend to the tier 8s. Now, remember that WCT rules, in the previous tournament, you were only allowed 3 tanks of the same tank type. So you could only run, say, 3 IS-3s or 3 T-32s at any given time. So if you have your whole team with an IS-3 and your whole team with a 54 lightweight, all 10 of you, that means that if 6 to 8 people have a T-32, you can still use those people in their T-32s. You can have 2 or 3 people in T-32s and still run T3 T-54 lightweights. If those 3 people in the T-54 lightweights have nothing but an IS-3 and a T-54 lightweight, that's fine. You can still play them. You will still have a full 7-person complement on your team. It's a similar story with the AMX 5100s. The AMX 5100s can be used on just about any map in a strategy of yours that incorporates it, but they are also pretty heavily used on urban maps, as I said, because they have really good burst damage potential. So those are the cornerstone tanks. Those are 5 key tanks you want to be looking for when assembling your team and preparing your team for WCT. Now, if your team roster doesn't have a single AMX Chaffee, if none of your team bought an AMX Chaffee when it was released about a year ago, there are alternatives. And the best suggestion I can give for running an alternate setup if you do not have an AMX Chaffee is to simply run 5 tier 8s and 2 tier 7 tanks in every match. So that means you need some people to get certain tier 7 tanks. And the reason for these tier 7 tanks over other tier 7 tanks is because, again, they're chosen for specific reasons over others by the winningest teams. The most successful teams choose these tanks for a reason. So the top picks for tier 7 tanks that you could still run in place of an AMX Chaffee are LTTB tier 7 Russian scout tanks, the M41 Walker Bulldog US scout tank, or the Tiger 1 German heavy tank at tier 7. So if you have even just 2 people on your team that have LTTBs, or 2 people on your team that have M41 Walker Bulldogs, as well as another 2 people that have 2 Tiger 1s, because nobody has an AMX Chaffee, again, you can still run pretty much any strategy on any map. You can run your LTTBs and or Walker Bulldogs on the much more open maps, and you can run your Tiger 1s on the more urban maps. The LTTB and Walker Bulldog, they're both quite nimble, and they can both outspot the enemy and provide you with positional data. The LTTB is very quick and nimble, has really troll armor, and it still can dish out some damage with its single-shot gun. The M41 Walker Bulldog, while it is kind of a moving ammo rack, it can dish out a lot of damage very quickly with its 10-shot autoloader. The Tiger 1 is quite the anomaly in that it has 1,500 hit points like a lot of Tier 8 heavy tanks, except it's a Tier 7 heavy tank. So you could run 2 Tigers on a more urban map, giving your team a really beefy, HP-heavy team composition. So those would be the top suggestions for picking tanks if you cannot field an AMX Chaffee. Those would be my top suggestions. Now, I have gone back and discussed with a couple other people what would probably be the top tier 6 choice if it is simply impossible to have an AMX Chaffee on your roster. And the number 1 choice that came up would simply be a US T-37. It's quick, it's agile, it can spot the enemy pretty well, and its single shotgun, it packs a fair punch, so it can dish out the damage where needed, if needed. So those are your alternatives if you simply do not have an AMX Chaffee available. And those are the tanks that I would highly recommend you make sure as many people get as many of them as possible in order to be the most successful team you can possibly be in WCT. That was a bit long-winded, but easily it was the most important out of the 3 steps that I'm going to tell you right now. Now, step 2, you need to start stockpiling silver. Because these battles and games are played in training rooms, they are a massive drain on silver, especially because you are going to be shooting premium rounds, 100%, and most of your tanks will more than likely be running premium consumables, such as food. So you will go very in the hole very quickly. You want to make sure you stockpile a good couple million silver before the WCT even starts if you're partaking in it. You want to stockpile a couple million silver if you're simply going to be running practices for the next little while, getting prepared for WCT, because it's always nice to have several million silver as kind of a buffer to going completely broke and being unable to really do much of anything in public matches. It's always nice to have that kind of buffer. If you run out of silver, then you simply can't play in a practice or in an actual WCT match if you have 0 silver, simply put. Now, the third step that I'm going to tell you here to prepare yourself for WCT proper, it's almost as important as the first step where you have everybody get the tanks you need. But it comes as more of a kind of an afterwards kind of thing. Is you want to be practicing, and you want to be practicing on the maps that will be played. Maps like Engsk, Prokhorovka, Cliff, Murovanka, Karelia, the maps that are actually used in WCT. So that means you're going to have to go back and check out some previous Twitch streams from, say, TVDL 2000 or Mad Hatter or whoever. Check out some Twitch streams of previous WCT matches and see which maps are played, so that you can practice on those maps beforehand, familiarize yourself with them, and from there you can start to build strategies about what tanks you want to use on those maps, where you want them to go, what you want them to do, etc., etc. And it's a very important step to implement into your team. The difference between a team that has practiced the maps, that has practiced strategies, that has a game plan before going into the game, it's a night and day difference between an inexperienced team that knows beforehand what it's doing and an inexperienced team that has no clue what it's doing beforehand, has not practiced, has not watched previous games, doesn't know what maps are being played, doesn't know what the best tanks are to use, so on and so forth. So just take my word for it. These are the 3 crucial steps that you want to take, and you want your whole team to take in order to properly prepare yourself for WCT, in order to do everything possible to make you the most successful team you can be in WCT. Anyways, this has gone on a lot longer than I intended to, but I hope I got my point across. Now, as I mentioned previously, if you are interested in WCT, and you would still like to know why the tanks that I listed are used over others, or even why certain tanks are simply not used by the most successful teams in the competitive setup, just let me know in the comments below. I'll consider it. I might go over it in a separate video, another long-winded video like this one, explaining these tanks are used because reasons ABC. These tanks are not used because reasons ABC, so on and so forth. If you're interested in that sort of thing, let me know below. I'll consider it, and I'll see what I can do for you. But in the meantime, these are the 3 most crucial steps that your team has to make towards being properly prepared for WCT. And number 1 is the most important one. It's also going to take the most amount of time, getting the appropriate tanks. So that's going to be it for this episode. I'm just going to let this game finish playing out. Hope you enjoy it, and I hope you found this video helpful, and I really hope to see you in WCT 3. In the meantime, this has been Mobius. Thanks very much for watching. Hope to see you on the battlefield or in my next video. Happy tank!